Why did my BIL force me to give birth in his living room? I was at my sister's house when my water broke. I asked her husband Xavier to drive me to the hospital, but he shot back. You Arabs will do anything for attention. You're not due for another month. The bathroom's down the hall. I looked over at my sister, expecting her to say something. Yeah, you should listen to my husband. She tried to sound assertive, but I could see the tears in her eyes. She was scared of him. Please, Xavier, I need you to drive. I was then interrupted by the sound of him turning up the TV. Xavier, this is real. The baby. Another contraction ripped through me. I collapsed against the kitchen counter. Does she even speak enough English to know what real contractions are? He wasn't even looking at me, just scrolling through his phone, feet up on the coffee table. The pain hit like broken glass grinding through my pelvis. Babe, can you get newspapers for your sister's show? Use the sports section. My sister's hands trembled as she spread newspapers under me. My own family was treating me like a dog. The fluid down my legs came into my vision. It wasn't clear anymore. It was red. Blood. Please. I was sobbing now, snot and bile running down my face. Something's wrong. The baby is coming. 5 weeks early? Xavier snorted. Convenient math. Do you even know who the father is? Or is this another welfare baby situation? I used all the strength I had to grab my phone and dial 911. Hello? 90 Maple Avenue. Beep. Xavier snatched it and hung up before I could finish. No way. You people always make everything a discrimination lawsuit, not falling for your setup. The contraction that hit next brought me to my knees. I screamed. Couldn't help it. It felt like my pelvis was cracking open. Zainab's hand found mine between contractions, squeezing 3 times fast. Our childhood signal for, I love you. Then she'd jerk away whenever he glanced over. Zainab, please, I gasped. You know this is real. Tell him. Don't even try your tricks on Zainab. I taught her how to be a real American. He pointed at her uncovered hair with his beer bottle. See? No hijab, no drama, all thanks to me. When Xavier looked back at the game, she leaned into my hair and whispered, Samihini, please forgive me in Arabic. I didn't even have time to feel bad for her. The contractions were 2 minutes apart. The sounds coming out of me weren't human anymore. They were guttural, animal. Ah! This is what happens when your kind breeds too young. Xavier cranked the volume higher. Probably don't even believe in the pull-out method. He giggled like a teenage girl. You probably even believe in that no means no BS. Ha 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 ha. Blood was soaking through the newspapers now. A lot of blood, all dark red. Zainab saw it and went white. I watched as she fearfully strolled towards the window, catching the eye of our neighbor Mrs. Ali outside. As soon as Xavier stood up to scream when his team won, Zainab started waving like a mad woman. Help! Help! She screamed while pointing at me. Xavier's head snapped around. What the hell do you think you're doing? She froze like a deer in headlights. I just thought maybe. She could barely speak between the sobs. He grabbed her arm, hard. Upstairs. Now. No, please, I need her, I screamed, reaching for my sister. Look at all the trouble you caused. He scoffed at me while dragging Zainab up the stairs. We're gonna have a talk about loyalty. The door slammed. I heard Zainab's muffled sobs, a thud against the wall. Her crying got quieter. Then nothing. I tried crawling to the door, made it 3 feet before another contraction knocked me down. Xavier literally stepped over me to get another beer from the fridge. His shoe caught the edge of the bloody newspaper. Oh my gosh, are you still committed to this act? He sighed. When you're done with whatever this is, you're cleaning my floor. I gasped. Not at what he said, but because I felt the baby's head coming out of me. The baby's coming out. Now. Sure it is. He didn't even turn around. That's when I snapped. If he wanted a show, he'd get one. I ripped off my abaya, my leggings, everything below the waist. Fine, I'll deliver this baby on your precious leather couch. I crawled to his $5,000 sofa, the one with custom Italian leather, climbed on it, started pushing, screaming, bleeding all over his pristine cushions. What the? Get off now! His smug face morphed into horror. He could see it, the baby's head actually crowning. You're ruining everything. Zainab, get down here now. She appeared in the doorway, face swollen from crying. Drive your terrorist sister to the hospital before she ruins my entire house. He threw something at her. Car keys. Suddenly, my sister was pulling me towards the door. You can drive? 10 years, she sobbed, speeding through red lights. He took my keys 2 years ago, said I had to earn them back. The drive to the hospital was 30 minutes, but Zainab made it in 15. As soon as we made it through the hospital doors, Zainab started screaming like a maniac. She's 35 weeks, heavy bleeding. Doctors swarmed around me as they wheeled me to the ER. A nurse kept checking between my legs, whispering to the doctor. Nobody would look at me. Where's my baby? I asked. Why isn't she crying? The doctor pulled off her surgical cap. Her eyes were wet. The bleeding was too severe. Your daughter. She fought so hard, but we couldn't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Zainab held me while I screamed. Not from pain this time, from emptiness. Sanan Takim, she whispered. We will take revenge. The empty bassinet sat in the corner of the room like a ghost. My eyes kept going back to it while Zainab held me and whispered Sanan Takim over and over into my hair. Her arms squeezed tighter with each word like she was trying to hold the broken pieces of me together. My whole body shook with sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. The nurses had wheeled my daughter away 20 minutes ago, but I could still see her tiny face behind my eyelids. Zainab's tears soaked through my hospital gown as she rocked me back and forth. A knock came at the door, and a police officer walked in with a clipboard. He looked tired, and his uniform was wrinkled like he'd been on shift too long. He pulled up a chair and started asking questions in a flat voice while checking boxes on his form. Name, age, address, estimated time of labor onset. I was still bleeding through the thick hospital pads they'd given me, and every shift sent fresh pain through my body. When he asked about the father, Zainab's hand gripped mine so hard her nails dug into my palm. I told him there was no father involved and watched him write something down without looking up. He asked if I had prenatal care, and I nodded while Zainab answered for me with dates and doctor names. The officer finished his paperwork and left without making eye contact. An hour later, a woman knocked and came in carrying a thick folder. Sabina Sutherland from the hospital social services had gray hair pulled back in a bun and kind eyes behind thick glasses. She sat down and started spreading pamphlets across the bed tray about grief support groups and burial assistance programs. Her voice was soft as she explained about counseling services and financial help for families who couldn't afford funeral costs. I couldn't focus on any of the words she was saying. My brain kept sliding away from what she was talking about like it was covered in oil. Zainab took notes with shaking hands on a yellow legal pad the woman gave her. Every few minutes, she'd glance at the door like Xavier might walk through it any second. Sabina left her business card and said she'd check back tomorrow. My phone kept buzzing on the nightstand, and I could see our parents' numbers flashing on the screen. Mom called 6 times, and Dad called 4. I turned the phone face down and pulled the hospital blanket up to my chin. The weight of having to tell them what happened felt impossible right now. I needed this bubble of just me and Zainab before the rest of the world crashed in with their questions and blame and grief. Zainab silenced her own phone when our mother's face appeared on the screen. The next morning, a different doctor came in with my chart. She was younger with dark circles under her eyes, and her scrubs had coffee stains on them. She sat on the edge of my bed and explained that the bleeding pattern and tissue samples showed clear signs of placental abruption. The placenta had torn away from the uterine wall, which cut off oxygen to the baby. She said with immediate medical attention, the survival rate was over 60%. Without it, the baby usually died within an hour. My numbness cracked and rage poured through like boiling water. Zainab went completely white and grabbed the bed rail to steady herself. We both understood exactly what those lost hours on Xavier's floor had cost us. The doctor left us alone again, and Zainab finally told me what happened upstairs after Xavier dragged her away. The thuds I'd heard were him shoving her into the wall over and over. He'd put his hand over her mouth to muffle her cries and told her she was lucky he didn't do worse. She pulled up her sleeves and showed me bruises going up both arms in different stages of healing. Yellow ones from weeks ago and purple ones from last Tuesday, and fresh red marks from yesterday. She admitted this had been happening for 3 years, but it got worse after she stopped wearing hijab to make him happy. He'd grab her wrist during arguments and twist until she cried. He'd push her into furniture and say she was clumsy when people asked about bruises. The nurse came in during afternoon rounds and mentioned that our neighbor Mrs. Ali had called the hospital 3 times asking about us. She wanted to help however she could and left her number at the nurse's station. A tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest when the nurse said Mrs. Ali saw Zainab's desperate signals through the window and was willing to make a statement about what she witnessed. The nurse brought me forms to sign requesting my complete medical records from the emergency room visit. There's something deeply unsettling about how Xavier keeps calling this woman's emergency an act while she's literally bleeding on his floor. What kind of person sees that much blood and still thinks someone's faking? I asked her to help me request the 911 recording from that day since Xavier had hung up before I could give our full address. Zainab helped me fill out the paperwork with steady hands while we focused on these small tasks instead of the crushing weight of what we'd lost. Each form felt like gathering evidence even though neither of us said it out loud. We had to decide about burial arrangements fast because of our faith requiring burial within 24 hours. I was still too weak to leave the hospital and could barely stand without help. Zainab promised she would handle everything and make sure my daughter got the dignity Xavier denied her in life. She called the mosque and arranged for the washing and wrapping while I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Xavier started bombing Zainab's phone with texts while she was making the burial calls. First, he denied everything and said I was being dramatic about normal pregnancy stuff. Then he blamed me for not being clear about how serious it was. Then he said he loved Zainab and just wanted her to come home where she belonged. I watched her face cycle through fear when his name appeared, then anger at his lies, then a terrible kind of longing for the man she thought she'd married before he showed his real face. The hospital chaplain knocked on my door while Zainab was still holding the phone. He had kind eyes and a soft voice that made me want to scream because nothing about this was soft or kind. He talked about religious arrangements and finding peace through prayer, and I just stared at the wall behind him. My baby was dead and he wanted to talk about acceptance. I couldn't even look at him. Zainab took his card when I turned away and slipped it into her pocket. She knew we'd need help even if I couldn't think about that right now. The social worker came in next with a clipboard and started asking about discharge planning. Where would I go when they released me? My apartment was 40 minutes away, and I couldn't go back to Zainab's house. Not with Xavier there. The social worker started making calls to shelters and temporary housing while Zainab sat next to me on the bed. She promised she wouldn't go home tonight either. I grabbed her hand and told her she wasn't going back to that house tonight or any night if I could help it. She looked scared about what Xavier would do, but more scared about being alone with him after what happened. She nodded and said she'd stay with me wherever we ended up. Her phone rang and it was Solange Temple from the domestic violence hotline calling us back. Zainab put it on speaker and Solange walked us through safety planning. She explained about getting a second phone Xavier didn't know about and keeping important documents somewhere safe. Zainab took notes in Arabic on the back of a hospital menu so she'd remember everything. The funeral director came by with paperwork and the costs made my stomach drop. Even the simplest infant burial was thousands of dollars we didn't have. Zainab's hands shook as she filled out forms for payment plans. We were drowning in paperwork about death when we should have been filling out birth certificates. The social worker came back and said Mrs. Ali had given her statement about what she saw. She'd actually recorded video on her phone of Zainab waving from the window and screaming for help. My heart pounded knowing we had proof, but Zainab went pale thinking about the whole neighborhood finding out about Xavier. Detective Bennett Thorne arrived in the afternoon to take our formal statements. He was tall and serious and wrote down everything in a small notebook. He asked specific questions about the 911 call and how Xavier took my phone and hung up. He wanted to know exactly what Xavier said and did. Zainab kept looking at her hands while she answered his questions. She was stuck between telling the truth about my baby and staying loyal to her husband. The detective wrote down every word and said he'd be in touch. After he left, my body crashed hard. The stitches burned like fire and my breasts were rock hard with milk for a baby who wasn't here. I couldn't stop bleeding and the nurse said that was normal, but nothing felt normal. Zainab helped me to the bathroom and held me up while I sobbed. The physical pain matched what was happening in my heart. Everything hurt. 3 days later, a small group of women from the mosque came for the burial. They wrapped my daughter in white cloth with gentle hands while saying prayers I couldn't understand through my tears. I only stayed for a few minutes before the grief got too heavy and I had to leave. Zainab stayed to say the prayers I couldn't manage. She held my hand at the grave and whispered that she'd make sure our daughter was never forgotten. On the way back to the shelter, my phone buzzed with a bank alert. Xavier had removed Zainab from their joint accounts and credit cards. She stared at the screen in shock. 10 years of marriage and he'd cut her off with one phone call. She had no money and no way to get to anything she'd saved over the years. Her whole life was in that house and now she couldn't even buy groceries. The shelter was a converted church basement apartment with cots lined up in rows. Other women sat on their beds with their kids and their own stories of running away. Zainab and I got beds next to each other and she helped me lie down carefully because everything still hurt. She kept checking her phone hoping Xavier would change his mind, but all she got were angry texts calling her a traitor. The shelter coordinator gave us vouchers for clothes from the donation closet since we'd left with nothing. Zainab picked out plain things that wouldn't draw attention while I just grabbed whatever fit over my swollen body. Nothing felt real. We were picking out dead people's donated clothes while my milk leaked through my shirt for a baby I'd never feed. That night Zainab couldn't sleep and neither could I. We lay on our cots listening to kids crying and women whispering on phones to lawyers and family members. She reached across the space between our beds and grabbed my hand. We didn't need words. We both knew everything had changed and there was no going back. Xavier kept calling her phone until she finally turned it off. The silence was worse than the ringing. The next morning, a woman named Solange from the shelter's legal team knocked on our door holding a thick folder and a box of tissues. She sat down with us in the tiny counseling room and started pulling out forms for emergency food stamps and cash assistance. Her hands moved fast across the papers while she explained how protective orders worked and what evidence we'd need. Zainab kept nodding and taking notes on the back of an envelope she found in her pocket. I could see her hands shaking, but her eyes looked different now, not scared anymore, just tired and angry. Solange showed us how to fill out each form and where to sign. She gave us prepaid cards for groceries and explained we could get them refilled every month. Zainab asked questions about the protective order process and whether Xavier could fight it in court. Solange said he could try, but with the evidence we had, it would be hard for him. 2 days later, I had my follow-up appointment at the hospital. The doctor pulled up my chart on her computer and turned the screen so we could both see it. She pointed at the ultrasound images from that night showing where the placenta had torn away from my uterus. She explained that with placental abruption, every single minute matters for the baby's survival. The longer the delay, the less oxygen the baby gets. I pulled out my phone and asked if I could record her explanation. She nodded and repeated everything slower this time. She said with proper medical care within the first hour my daughter might have survived. But after 3 hours with heavy bleeding, the chances dropped to almost zero. Zainab sat next to me getting paler with each word. Her guilt was turning into something else, something harder and colder. The doctor printed out copies of everything and signed a statement about the timeline. That afternoon, a package arrived at the shelter addressed to me. Inside were the 911 call records from that night. The transcript showed my call at 8:47 p.m. lasting 12 seconds before disconnection. Then dispatch tried calling back at 8:48 p.m. but the call was blocked. Seeing it printed on official county letterhead made it real in a way nothing else had. Zainab read it over my shoulder 3 times. Each time her jaw got tighter. We made copies at the shelter's office and added them to our growing evidence folder. The next morning my phone started blowing up with notifications. Xavier had posted on Facebook calling me a welfare queen who faked a medical emergency for attention and lawsuit money. He wrote that I probably wasn't even pregnant and just wanted to scam his family. His friends were commenting things about how immigrants always play the victim card. One guy wrote that we come here and immediately start looking for ways to sue real Americans. Another said this is why we need stronger deportation laws. Solange came to find us when she heard me crying. She looked at my phone and immediately told me to start taking screenshots of everything. Don't respond to anything she said. Don't defend yourself. Just document. I spent the next 4 hours screenshotting every post and comment. Xavier kept posting new things about how I was probably on welfare before I even met his family. His cousin posted that she always knew something was off about me. His work friends were sharing articles about false discrimination lawsuits. Zainab sat next to me watching me work. She saw her husband's public face for the first time. The same man who called himself progressive at dinner parties was letting his friends write the most racist stuff I'd ever seen. She kept saying she didn't know he had friends like this, but I could tell she was lying to herself. How did the hospital get that ultrasound data to show exactly when the placenta tore away? The way they can track those medical timelines down to the minute makes me wonder what other evidence might be stored in those hospital computers that could help them. The next day, we went to the courthouse to file for an emergency protective order. Zainab's hands shook so bad she could barely hold the pen. The clerk had to help her fill out the sections about the abuse. She had to write down dates and incidents going back 2 years. Times he grabbed her, times he threw things, times he locked her in rooms. The clerk said they would try to serve Xavier at his office since that's where he'd have to sign for it. We both knew once he got those papers, everything would get worse before it got better. 3 days passed with no word about the protective order. The process server went to Xavier's office 3 times, but his secretary kept saying he was in meetings. The 4th time, she said he was traveling for business, even though Zainab knew he was home because she'd seen his car in their driveway when we drove past. The frustration was eating at us. We were following all the rules and doing everything legally, but he was still finding ways around it. Meanwhile, we were sleeping in a family shelter room with paper-thin walls and no privacy. Detective Thorne called asking if we had any photos from inside the house that night. He needed pictures of the blood on the couch and carpet to document the scene. I had to sit there and describe every detail while he took notes. Where exactly was I when my water broke? How much blood was on which cushion? What position was I in when the baby started coming? Zainab broke down completely when he asked about the newspapers Xavier made her put under me. She kept apologizing for not taking pictures, but who thinks about evidence when their sister is dying on the floor? That night, we had our first real fight since everything happened. I wanted to call our parents and tell them everything. She begged me not to. She said it would kill our mother to know what happened. I got so mad I threw my pillow across the room. How could she still be protecting everyone else's feelings when her husband let my baby die? She started sobbing about family shame and what people would say. We ended up holding each other and crying until we couldn't anymore. Both of us too broken to stay angry. The next morning, the shelter coordinator offered us our own room instead of just the emergency cots. It was small, but it had a door that locked and our own bathroom. Zainab hesitated when they asked if she wanted to get her things from the house. She started listing everything she'd have to leave behind. Her wedding album, our grandmother's gold jewelry she'd been saving, the prayer rug our father gave her. She knew if she tried to go back for anything, Xavier would destroy it all just to hurt her. 3 days later, the records office called saying the death certificate was ready for pickup. The drive there took 20 minutes but felt like hours with Zainab gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles went white. The clerk behind the desk handed me the envelope without looking up from her computer. Just another piece of paper to her. To me, it weighed more than my daughter ever did. Official cause of death, placental abruption secondary to maternal trauma. Translation, Xavier killed my baby. My legs gave out right there in the lobby. Zainab caught me before I hit the floor and half carried me to the car while I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. She drove us back to the shelter while I I clutched that paper and screamed into my hands. When we got to the hospital parking lot for my follow-up appointment, Xavier was there leaning against his truck. My whole body went cold. He started walking toward us fast, his face twisted with rage. Zainab grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the entrance, but he was gaining on us. That's when the security guard stepped between us. Xavier stopped short, his hands balling into fists. The guard's hand moved to his radio. Xavier backed up slowly, pointing at us the whole time before getting in his truck and peeling out. Zainab's hands shook for an hour after that. Back at the shelter, Solange pulled out a basic flip phone from her desk drawer. She showed us how to turn off location services on our regular phones and check for tracking apps. Xavier had installed 3 different ones on Zainab's phone without her knowing. Solange taught us about digital footprints and how abusers use technology to stalk. She gave us the flip phone for emergencies only, a number Xavier wouldn't know. Zainab took notes on everything, asking questions about VPNs and secure messaging apps. 2 days later, we met with Yvette Sumner in her downtown office. She specialized in civil cases against abusers. The wrongful death suit paperwork sat heavy on the conference table. Suing family felt wrong even though Xavier wasn't really family anymore. Zainab kept wringing her hands, worried about what would come out during discovery. All the times she didn't call police, all the times she stayed. Yvette explained we had a strong case, but warned us civil court was different from criminal. Lower burden of proof, but also lower consequences. Money, not jail time. The protective order finally came through a week later. The process server found Xavier at his gym and served him in front of everyone. The judge granted a 2-week temporary order until the full hearing. Zainab knew from experience that paper didn't stop fists. She'd had 3 restraining orders before. Each time Xavier found ways around them, but at least now violating it would be a crime. Something on his record. The next morning, Xavier's company called him in for an HR meeting. Someone had forwarded his social media posts celebrating putting terrorist baby killers in their place. Company policy violations. He wasn't fired but got an official warning. Any more incidents and he'd be terminated. Zainab felt guilty even though she hadn't reported him. It was probably Mrs. Ali or someone from the hospital. My first therapy appointment was with a specialist who understood baby loss and domestic violence. The session left me exhausted, but somehow lighter, like I'd been carrying rocks in my chest and finally put a few down. The therapist gave me worksheets about grief and trauma. Zainab sat in the waiting room the whole time, looking at me with hope when I came out. Maybe healing was possible. Maybe we could both get through this. That night, my body betrayed me again. My breasts were hard and hot, leaking milk for a baby who would never drink it. The physical pain felt like mockery, empty arms and a full chest. Zainab researched remedies online and came back with cabbage leaves and ice packs. She helped me stuff the cold leaves in my bra without saying anything, just gentle touches and quiet determination. She brought me pain medicine every 4 hours and helped change the soaked breast pads. Detective Thorne called the next afternoon with news. He'd gotten the full 911 audio from that day. You could hear everything. Me begging for help. Xavier in the background saying, "Not falling for your setup," before the line went dead. The evidence was building, but he warned us proving criminal liability was still hard. Prosecutors wanted slam dunks, not complicated family cases, but the recording would help with the civil suit at least. That evening, Zainab's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Xavier was gathering character witnesses for the hearing. His boss, his gym buddies, even his mother who hadn't spoken to him in years. He'd hired a good lawyer too, someone who specialized in defending men accused of domestic violence. The fear spiked again, but we were getting better at channeling it into action. Zainab started a notebook documenting everything. Times, dates, witnesses. She took photos of my medical records and backed them up in 3 different places. We weren't going to be caught unprepared again. The shelter room was smaller than Xavier's bathroom. 2 narrow beds with thin gray blankets, a shared bathroom down the hall that smelled like bleach and old pipes. Zainab stood in the doorway holding 1 black duffel bag while 10 years of marriage stayed behind in that house. She kept touching her bare ring finger like she was checking if this was real. The shelter worker showed us the common kitchen and the curfew rules and the panic button on the wall. Other women moved through the halls with the same empty look in their eyes. That first night, Zainab woke up crying 4 times, and each time she reached for a husband who wasn't there before remembering why. Yvette came by the next morning with folders and legal papers spread across the tiny desk. She explained that if we went after Xavier in civil court, his lawyer would dig into everything. Our immigration papers, our family back home, every job we ever had, every mistake we ever made. They'd twist our whole lives into weapons against us. She showed us examples from other cases where women got torn apart on the stand. I looked at the papers and then at Zainab, who was still touching that empty ring finger. My baby deserved justice, even if it meant they'd drag us through hell to get it. We signed the papers. Solange started coming 3 times a week to practice for the protective order hearing. She'd pretend to be the judge and make Zainab tell her story over and over. Every time Zainab would start strong, but then add little words to soften it. Instead of saying Xavier hit her, she'd say he got upset and things got physical. Instead of saying he controlled the money, she'd say they had different ideas about finances. 10 years of training to never make him look bad was hard to break. Solange would stop her and make her start again with just the facts. No apologies, no explanations, no protecting him. Court day came 3 weeks later, and my whole body remembered that night the second I saw Xavier in the hallway. He wore a suit that cost more than we'd spent on food in a year, and his lawyer looked like he ate people like us for breakfast. The blood, the pain, the baby who never got to breathe, it all came rushing back. Why does Xavier's lawyer specialize in defending men accused of domestic violence? That seems like such a specific career choice. Makes me wonder what kind of person builds their whole practice around keeping violent men out of trouble while their victims suffer. I couldn't breathe right and my hands started shaking. Zainab grabbed my hand and squeezed 3 times fast, our old signal, and I forced myself to stay standing. Inside the courtroom, Xavier's lawyer went after us like we were criminals. He called me manipulative and desperate for attention. He said Zainab was mentally unstable and making things up for sympathy. He twisted every single fact into something ugly. When Zainab said Xavier wouldn't let her drive, the lawyer said she was too emotional to be trusted with a car. When I said Xavier refused to call 911, the lawyer said I was being dramatic about normal pregnancy discomfort. I bit my tongue so hard it bled to keep from screaming at his lies. Zainab kept starting to dissociate, that blank look she'd get when Xavier would scream at her, and I'd squeeze her hand to bring her back. Then Mrs. Ali appeared on the courtroom screen through video link from Pakistan where she was visiting family. The judge played her footage from that night and you could see everything. Zainab at the window waving her arms and screaming for help while Xavier was distracted. Her desperate signals, her tears, the terror on her face. The judge's expression changed completely completely watching it. For the first time since this started, someone in authority actually saw what happened to us. The judge took 20 minutes to decide, but it felt like 20 hours. She granted a 6-month protective order but said criminal charges were up to the DA's office to pursue. It wasn't everything we wanted, but it was something real. Zainab started crying with relief that she had legal permission to stay away from him. 6 months where he couldn't come near us or call us or send his friends to check on us. 6 months to figure out how to build a life without him. Outside the courthouse, Xavier walked past us with his lawyer and muttered something just loud enough for us to hear, but quiet enough that his lawyer could claim he said nothing. I pulled out my phone fast and started recording while Zainab froze completely. 10 years of training to pretend she didn't hear his insults taking over. His lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him away, but I saw that look in his eyes. This wasn't over for him. 3 days later, Detective Thorne called while we were eating breakfast in the shelter kitchen. The DA was reviewing charges for interfering with emergency services. He warned it could take months and might not result in any jail time, but at least they were taking it seriously. He said the video from Mrs. Ali helped a lot and they were building a case. After he hung up, I stared at my phone thinking about my baby and whether any of this would bring her back. The complete medical report arrived 2 weeks later in a thick envelope that felt too heavy for what it meant. Page after page of medical terms, but one line stood out clear as day. With immediate medical intervention, my daughter had a 70% chance of survival. 70%. She could have lived if Xavier had just let me go to the hospital. The numbers felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but also like ammunition for our case. Zainab helped me make copies and file them with all our other evidence, building our paper trail of everything he took from us. 2 days later, Yvette called us into her office and spread out a thick stack of papers across her desk. She pointed to each section with her pen while explaining that she was filing an official notice to pursue wrongful death claims against Xavier. The legal terms made my head spin, but one thing was clear when she looked up at us with serious eyes. She said the depositions would be brutal and public. Xavier's lawyer would try to tear us apart on the stand. They'd dig into my past and my family and anything they could use against us. Zainab grabbed my hand under the table. We both nodded at the same time. This might be the only real consequence Xavier would ever face. The next week, I sat in a small office with beige walls and a tissue box on the side table. The therapist had kind eyes, but I couldn't look at her when I finally said what had been eating at me. I told her about the dreams where I hurt Xavier. Not just hurt him, but really bad stuff that scared me when I woke up. Sometimes I'd be driving and imagine running him over with my car. Other times, I'd picture myself with a knife doing things that made me sick to think about. My hands shook as I described how detailed these fantasies got. The therapist didn't look shocked or disgusted. She helped me understand that this rage was normal after what happened. Meanwhile, Zainab started seeing her own therapist twice a week to work through 10 years of Xavier's abuse. Back at the shelter, we had to be in by 8 every night or lose our beds. The kitchen was shared with 12 other families and you had to sign up for cooking times. Every morning meant filling out more paperwork for food stamps or housing assistance or medical coverage. The caseworker's office smelled like old coffee and desperation. Zainab would cry in the bathroom sometimes about needing charity. She'd been raised to never take handouts, and now we were living off them. The shelter gave us toothpaste and shampoo in little bottles like a hotel, but nothing about this felt temporary. 3 weeks into shelter life, I was walking back from the grocery store when I saw Xavier's car creeping along behind me. He drove so slow that other cars honked at him, but he just kept following me for 6 blocks. When I ducked into a pharmacy, he parked right outside and waited. I called the police from inside the store, but by the time they showed up, he was gone. The next day, he showed up at the same grocery store where we shopped. He'd walk past our aisle real slow, then circle back again, always staying just far enough away that it looked like coincidence. The third time it happened, Zainab took a video on her phone. We brought everything to the police station and filed another report. The officer looked tired as he explained that without clear proof of intent, they couldn't arrest him for shopping at the same store. The protective order said he couldn't come within 500 feet, but he always stayed at 501. He knew exactly where the line was and danced right along it. The system had so many holes and he'd found them all. We started shopping at different times and taking different routes home. Every car that drove too slow made my heart race. Every footstep behind us made Zainab grab my arm. On Thursday nights, I started going to a support group at the community center. The room had uncomfortable plastic chairs arranged in a circle and a coffee pot that was always empty. Other parents sat there with the same hollow look in their eyes. One woman lost her baby because the hospital sent her home saying it was false labor. Another couldn't afford the ambulance ride when her water broke early. A man's wife died because the emergency room was full and they waited 6 hours. Each story felt like mine, but different. Medical neglect came in so many forms. Poverty made it worse. Nobody there had money for lawyers except me, and that was only because Yvette worked on contingency. For the first time since losing my daughter, I didn't feel completely alone. When the meeting ended, Zainab was waiting outside in the car we'd borrowed from the shelter. She had tears in her eyes, but they were proud tears. That weekend, we sat on the shelter bed with a small cardboard box between us. Inside was the tiny hospital bracelet with baby girl written on it. The purple outfit I'd bought at a thrift store when I found out I was having a girl. 3 ultrasound photos from my second trimester when everything still seemed possible. Zainab had printed out the one good photo she took of me pregnant where I was smiling and didn't know what was coming. We added a letter I wrote to my daughter telling her how much I loved her even though we never met. The box sat next to our growing pile of case files and evidence folders on the small shelf by our bed. Grief and justice tangled together in everything now. Monday morning, we walked into Yvette's office for another meeting about discovery documents when my phone started buzzing. The screen showed a number I recognized from the DA's office. Zainab held my hand as I swiped to answer both of us, ready for whatever comes next. Thanks for tagging along while I wondered and explored all this stuff today. Definitely been an interesting little journey. Until next time, subscribe for more content like this.